Hey there, today's December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, according to one U.S. president.
A date which will live in infamy.
A day that saw U.S. military forces plunged into a 4-year war in a world divided, but also one of a very few days that saw martial law declared in the United States. With that somber beginning, today let's talk about how the president can direct the use of military force domestically. The president's main powers derive from the Insurrection Act of 1807 and the ability to declare martial law. The main restrictions on that power are the Posse Comitatas Act as well as Congress and the Supreme Court. The Insurrection Act of 1807 gives the president broad scope in using the military and Federalized National Guard troops within the national borders to suppress civil disorder, insurrection, and rebellion. It came about after the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794, when a group of western Pennsylvania farmers and distillers rebelled against the collection of taxes on whiskey, going so far as to form their own Assembly of Representatives and assaulting, tarring, and feathering federal tax collectors. The Whiskey Rebellion is thought to be the first significant test of the federal authority. The Insurrection Act has been amended several times, like in 2007 when the Bush administration added a clause that allows the president to take control of a state's National Guard without the governor's consent. Martial law, in the simplest terms, is military control of law enforcement and other government functions. It's pretty serious stuff. Think curfews, show me your papers, and detention by military forces without charges. To date, martial law has only been implemented nationally once, and that was during the Civil War. Only the president can implement martial law nationally. Governors can implement martial law within their states using the National Guard and calling for federal troops to assist as needed. All right, on the opposite end of that spectrum is the Posse Comitatas Act. It prevents the military from conducting domestic law enforcement. This sounds pretty cut and dried, but it does have a wee little exception. Except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or Act of Congress, which circles us right back around to the Insurrection Act and all those amendments and add-ons to it. For our purposes, suffice it to say that the president has plenty of exceptions to work with. For a much more detailed but still understandable breakdown of all the legal aspects in play, hop over to Legal after you finish this video. I'll leave a link in the description below. Alright, at this point you're probably wondering why a channel that focuses on systemic racism and inequities is talking about the president using the military. Let me explain by walking through all the major domestic uses of military force in the last 80 years. The first was today, in 1941. December 7, 1941, following an attack on Pearl Harbor, martial law was declared in Hawaii in anticipation of a full-on invasion. In 1957, President Eisenhower called on the 101st Airborne Division to safely escort 9 black students into Little Rock Central High School after the governor of Arkansas had deployed the National Guard to block the integration of the school. In 1962 and 63, President Kennedy sent troops to Mississippi and Alabama to enforce civil rights laws and enforce the integration of the University of Mississippi, University of Alabama, and Alabama public schools. In 1967, President Johnson sent the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions to Detroit to quell riots sparked after police raided a bar in a black neighborhood. The Detroit riots left 43 dead, injured 1,000, and destroyed more than 2,000 buildings. In 1992, George H.W. Bush sent troops to Los Angeles at the request of Governor Pete Wilson to put down riots that ensued after the acquittal of 4 police officers who had beaten Rodney King. The LA riots claimed 55 lives, injured over 2,000 people, and cost more than $1 billion in property damage. Unless you can ignore any racial implications of World War II, every recent domestic employment of the U.S. military has had a racial nexus. The 1941 deployment, while a precursor to ending the Holocaust in Europe, also preceded the mass internment of around 120,000 Japanese Americans. The deployments in 57, 62, and 63 saw the federal government acting as an anti-racist to advance civil rights in spite of state and local efforts to conserve segregation and other racist policies. The 1967 and 92 deployments reversed that, with troops sent to restore order after police brutality against black people ended in widespread protest and rioting. In 2005, when the president considered invoking the Insurrection Act but decided not to, this also had racial implications. See, President George W. Bush, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, opted not to deploy troops. His administration was unclear whether Americans would be comfortable with the military intervention in that natural disaster. Since then, Congress has helpfully clarified that the president may use the military to assist in the restoration of order following natural disasters, epidemics, or terrorist attacks, in addition to the civil disorder, insurrection, and rebellion that I mentioned earlier. President Trump has considered invoking the Insurrection Act in response to the protest and rioting that followed the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police.
When federal troops backed up police who cleared a path for the U.S. president, it was a signal from Donald Trump that he's willing to smash protests anywhere in the country.
That is why I am taking immediate presidential action to stop the violence and restore security and safety in America.
This, despite the governors of several states declaring that they didn't need or want help. Remember the George Bush 2007 loophole. Most recently, people have speculated the role the military might play in the upcoming transition of power. Would they support a president claiming that the election results are invalid? Most indications are the military will, as they're sworn, support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This is despite recent firings at the highest levels of the Department of Defense. The civilians controlling the military exercise more of an oversight role than giving tactical direction. They allocate budgets, enact policy, and get reports. Despite their civilian leadership's loyalty to Trump, the uniformed military would be very unlikely to have a role in subverting the Constitution. For one thing, the Secret Service, who protect the president-elect, and former presidents, will likely play a much more important, if largely invisible, role in the presidential transition than the military ever would. Long before military involvement, there would be a very confusing interdepartmental struggle within the Secret Service and the Department of Homeland Security. While anything is possible, I don't see a domestic military deployment as the end of an election and presidency that will live in infamy. Remember, this summary is just the tip of an iceberg of information, and these events and laws can get very complicated. That's why it's important to discuss these tough subjects as part of understanding that the way things are isn't the way things have to be. The greatness of America lies in the fact that we the people can keep working to help make this a more perfect union. This is part of a series of videos exploring how aspects of our government work and how they affect the underrepresented. Let me know in the comments what you think of the president's use of the military domestically. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. Biden might stop pouring gasoline on the flames, but he won't put this dumpster fire out. We're going to have to hold all our levels of government responsible for representing our needs and interests. Brunch is still canceled. Brunch is still canceled. Until next time, be safe out there. It's a beautiful and dangerous world.